Never thought our airline would start offering a safari tour right here in first class." The words cut through the calm cabin like a blade. The air went still. The clinking of glasses and the rustle of newspapers died instantly. Every head turned in disbelief toward the man who had just dropped the insult. Captain Richard Hale, 58, silver hair, pale blue eyes, and that half-smile of practiced arrogance that came with decades of unchecked authority. The target of his words sat in seat 2A, Dr. Maya Aya Carter, 30 date, one of the world's leading pediatric cardiologists, her face gracing the cover of international medical journals. Yet in that moment, she was not a scientist of global renown. To the man in the cockpit, she was simply someone who didn't belong, someone who needed reminding of her place. Maya lifted her head. A flush crept up her neck, but her eyes were cold steel. Being underestimated, being sidelined, none of this was new. She had endured it 1,000 times, from cafeteria lunches in medical school to her Harvard commencement. But here, in the sanctified calm of first class, in front of passengers wrapped in privilege, the blatant sting landed deeper than any insult she had ever borne. First class had always felt like an oasis, polished leather seats, champagne fizzing in crystal, faces hidden behind the Wall Street Journal. But with a single remark, the oasis became an arena of silence. Lylan Gwynn, a flight attendant of 20,005, went pale. Her eyes flicked toward Maya, then dropped, shame pressing her down. She wanted to act, to speak, but the captain's icy gaze bound her like a chain. And the other passengers? A businessman in an Armani suit suddenly found the safety card utterly fascinating. A young couple across the aisle leaned toward the window, marveling at the clouds as if they were newly discovered wonders. No one wanted involvement. They would rather let one person be humiliated than risk their expensive flight delayed 30 minutes. Their silence was complicity. Inside Maya, two currents clashed violently. One, a searing rage, begged her to rise, to shout in the man's face, "Ansamu." The other, cold reason, whispered that a single outburst would brand her forever. The angry woman of color. She drew a slow breath. Her finger traced the rim of the champagne glass, bubbles bursting softly on her lips as she fought for calm. "No, I won't let him turn me into a spectacle. Not today. Not ever." Her voice emerged, soft yet sharp as a scalpel. "Excuse me, Captain. What did you just say?" Hale arched his brows, his smile curving into a smug slash. "It was just an observation, Doctor," he drawled, pretending to toy with prey. "You stand out. That's all. Enjoy your flight." He even had the audacity to wink. Heat surged to Maya's temples. But she didn't scream. She didn't weep. Instead, she unlocked her phone. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with fury reined in. A message fired off. "Ethan, are you at the gate? We have a problem." Less than 10 seconds later, the reply appeared. "I'm in the lounge. Are you okay? What happened?" Maya typed fast. "Captain Richard Hale just insulted me. In front of the entire cabin." No more words were needed. She knew her husband. Ethan Carter, 40, 2, Chairman and CEO of Aegis Holdings, dubbed by the press the Gentle Wolf for his quiet personal life and merciless precision in the boardroom. He had one principle: insult his wife, and you had just signed your own destruction. Maya stared at the screen. The next message made her chest tighten. Sit still. Do nothing. I'm on my way. Meanwhile, Hale strode calmly back toward the cockpit, convinced he had reasserted order. He had no idea the throne he had occupied for 35 years was already shaking beneath him, undone by a handful of careless words. Maya clenched the phone, eyes fixed on the closing cockpit door. Behind that steel barrier sat the man who had spat contempt on her dignity, now preparing to command the lives of hundreds. One thought flared in her mind. If in just a few minutes he walks up this aisle, then Captain Richard Hale's world will collapse here. In this very cabin he thought he ruled. She didn't know whether to shiver or to smile. The forward cabin door was still open. The jet bridge stood silent, white light from the terminal spilling in like a pathway of fate. Inside the cabin, time slowed. Each second stretched into a minute. Maya sat motionless, eyes fixed on that empty space where she knew Ethan would appear. But the other passengers had no idea. To them, the flight was simply delayed. Murmurs of frustration began to ripple. When are we taking off? It's been nearly 20 minutes. Unbelievable! I have a meeting in London. Lylan Gwyn, the young flight attendant, moved up and down the aisle, trying to mask her anxiety. Her smile was a fragile mask, seconds away from cracking. In her mind, the image of Captain Hale loomed sharp. That mocking wink, the silent command that said, "Shut up, you're just a pawn." Then a figure appeared at the top of the jet bridge. Ethan Carter stepped aboard. He did not need to speak. His presence alone shifted the air. A charcoal grey suit fit his solid frame, leather shoes striking a steady, resonant rhythm against the metal floor. He looked more like a refined professor than a corporate titan, but his eyes told another story. Cold, piercing. Authority radiated from him like gravity. Maya caught that gaze. A barely perceptible nod. So small it might have gone unnoticed. But to her, it was a shield. Lila hurried forward, trying to keep her voice composed. "Sir, boarding is complete. We are preparing to close the door." Ethan cut her off, his voice low but carrying the weight of command. "The door will remain open. I need to speak with the captain." The words were light, but they made Lila shiver. She felt as though she had just heard a sentence pronounced. The cockpit door swung open. Richard Hale emerged, face twisted in irritation at being disturbed during his domain, his familiar arrogance now mixed with open annoyance. "What's going on?" he barked, shooting Lila a venomous glare. "We're behind schedule. We need to take off now." Then he stopped. His eyes landed on Ethan. At first he looked at him with disdain. Just another well-dressed man. Maybe a business-class passenger out of place. "What can I do for you, friend?" Hale smirked. "If you're lost, economy's in the back." The murmurs in the cabin fell to silence. Passengers lifted their heads. They did not know what was unfolding, but it was clear something enormous was about to erupt. Ethan stepped forward. The space between him and the captain shrank to only a few feet. He was not much taller, but his presence made Hale falter, stepping back half a pace. "You are Captain Richard Hale, correct?" "That's me." Hale puffed his chest. And you are? Ethan paused, his gaze sharp as a blade. I am Ethan Carter, Chairman and CEO of Aegis Holdings, the company that owns Horizon Air. Which means, Captain, for the last 3 years you have been my employee. The words detonated like a bomb. The cabin exploded with whispers. A businesswoman froze mid-sip, her hand suspended with a glass of wine. A young couple exchanged stunned glances. Lila stood paralyzed, her heartbeat thunderous in her chest. Hale's face shifted. The smirk vanished. Panic flickered in his eyes, quickly masked with defiance. Aegis, is it? He muttered, clearing his throat. Fine, so you're the big boss, but this is my cockpit, my flight. If you have a problem, file it with HR. I have a schedule. He tried to brush past. Ethan did not move. The problem is here and now. His voice dropped lower, sharp enough to chill the air. You just publicly insulted a passenger in first class, a world-renowned doctor who has saved thousands of children. And she is my wife. Maya's breath caught. Those words struck through her like lightning. For the first time in years, someone had stood in front of her, taking the blow of humiliation on her behalf. Hale stammered, I was only joking. Only a bit of humor. Joking. Ethan's tone cut, each word a shard of ice. Wearing my company's uniform, on my company's plane, you called my wife's hair a safari tour. You call that humor? The cabin was silent, suffocating. 1 second felt like an eternity. Then Ethan delivered the sentence. You are no longer the captain of this flight. In fact, you are no longer an employee of Aegis Holdings. You are terminated immediately. Lila reeled. Part of her wanted to cheer. Part of her trembled at the sheer scale of the decision. The passengers exchanged bewildered glances. No one dared to break the silence. Hale stood frozen. His face flushed red, then drained white, then purple with rage. His lips quivered as he tried to cling to something. You can't do this. I have a union. I have 35 years of experience. I'll sue. Ethan's voice was steady, merciless. Then sue. But you'll do it as an unemployed man. Collect your things. Get off my aircraft. The words fell like a death sentence. In that instant, Maya understood. This was no longer just an argument on a plane. This was the unmasking of power, the moment a man who believed himself untouchable realized his throne had always been built on sand, and the sand was slipping away, grain by grain, taking his career with it. Captain Richard Hale spun, casting one last glance at Maya. No longer arrogant, it burned with raw hatred. A chill ran down her spine. He left. The cabin remained silent, but this silence was different, heavy, tense, like a lake holding the ripples of a stone just swallowed. Ethan turned to the passengers, his voice even. Ladies and gentlemen, this flight is cancelled. A new aircraft and crew will be arranged. All costs will be covered. I sincerely apologize. He walked to Maya. His hand closed firmly around hers. A single squeeze said it all. You are not alone. The sound of the cockpit door closing was the final punctuation on Richard Hale's 35-year career. Yet inside the first-class cabin, no one felt relief. Instead, the atmosphere stretched tight, like a violin string on the verge of snapping. Passengers left the plane in a hurry. Some whispered with excitement, as if they had just witnessed a scene out of a prestige drama. Others frowned, frustrated that their journey had been cancelled. But all of them knew. They had seen something rare. A captain stripped of his power on his very own stage. Maya sat quietly, her glass of champagne now flat. A feeling of both comfort and unease swirled inside her. Justice had been swift, sharp, and precise. But behind it lingered a hollow uncertainty, like a tremor warning of even greater aftershocks to come. Barely an hour later, Ethan and Maya Carter were ushered into a discreet office of Horizon Air inside the airport. The room was brightly lit, its glass walls overlooking the runway, but the air inside was thick and heavy. A large screen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Helena Ortiz, the 60-year-old head of human resources. Beside her, joining via video, sat Victor Lamb, chief legal counsel, twirling a pencil in his fingers, like a scalpel ready to dissect every detail. "Ethan," Helena began, her voice steady but her gaze sharp. "What exactly happened? Reports from the ground are fragmented." Ethan recounted the events. His voice did not waver, each word delivered with surgical precision. From the safari tour remark to Hale's searing glare as he left the plane, Ethan omitted nothing. Maya sat silently beside him, a living piece of evidence. Helena frowned. "Ethically, you were right, but procedurally, you just bypassed every safeguard." Victor cut in. "A public firing, in front of passengers, without investigation, without union representation. From a legal standpoint, that's a gift, wrapped lawsuit." Maya looked up. In their eyes, she was no longer the woman insulted, but a liability. The realization tightened her chest. "He insulted my wife," Ethan said, his voice low but edged with steel. "On my aircraft. At Aegis, racism is a crime without mitigation." Helena exhaled slowly, struggling to keep her composure. "We should have suspended Hale, interviewed witnesses, Lila, First Officer Owen, and then made a decision. Within 48 hours, we could have closed this cleanly without openings. Instead, you handed him the perfect case." Maya's stomach sank. The perfect case. The words echoed in her mind, as if guilt now lay with them for acting too fast, rather than with the man who had caused it all. Ethan clasped his hands, eyes fixed on the screen. "Give me the solution." Victor tapped his pencil against the desk. 1. Total confidentiality regarding Maya. No press, no statement placing her at the center. This is not the story of Dr. Maya Carter, but the responsibility of Aegis. 2, Helena continued. The passengers. Full refunds, plus 5,000 compensation each, along with an apology letter from the CEO. That's the cost of buying silence. 3. Richard Hale, Victor added, his tone lower. We approach his lawyer, offer an ironclad NDA. Permanent silence in exchange for a reasonable settlement. If he signs, he vanishes from the press. Maya's fists clenched. Logic told her they were doing what had to be done. But her heart screamed. Why did everything revolve around money and contracts rather than truth? When the meeting ended, Ethan reached for Maya's hand. His voice softened more than it had since the incident. "I'm sorry you had to hear words like procedure and liability instead of justice. But believe me, I won't let Hale walk away free." Maya nodded, but unease gnawed at her. She remembered Hale's final look. Not remorse, not fear, just raw, venomous hatred. He had lost everything, and a man with nothing left is often the most dangerous of all. The Aegis private jet lifted off, carrying them to London in place of the cancelled flight. In the quiet cabin, Maya leaned back, watching her husband work on his laptop. Outside, the endless blue stretched across the horizon. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to believe the storm had passed, that Richard Hale would fade into obscurity. But only days later, the silence shattered. A headline blazed across the Sentinel. "Destroyed at 30,000 feet. Veteran captain loses career over harmless joke." The article was paired with a photo of Richard Hale in his old uniform, standing tall, his smile weathered but proud. Maya read the words and knew instantly the real battle had only just begun. The article in the Sentinel exploded like a spark thrown into a barrel of gasoline. Within 24 hours, it was shared tens of thousands of times across social media. On the cover, Richard Hale, his silver hair slightly disheveled, his face worn with hardship, framed as the symbol of a man destroyed by corporate power. Caleb Rook, a journalist known for his provocative style, spun the story so skillfully that even neutral readers found it hard to resist being pulled into the emotional vortex. He painted Hale as a dedicated pilot, a father and grandfather devoted to his family, who had sacrificed his life to the skies, only to be cruelly fired over one clumsy remark. "I was only joking. If Dr. Carter had told me my words hurt her, I would have apologized immediately." Hale was quoted, his eyes glistening in the photo, lips pressed together as though holding back pain. Suddenly, the slur safari tour was reframed as an ill-timed joke, and the swift justice on the plane was rewritten as the ruthless overreach of a billionaire CEO protecting his wife. The hashtag #HadJusticeForHale began to spread. People wrote, 30 for 5 years of service, gone for a joke. This is justice? A CEO in a position of power snaps his fingers and destroys a man's life. Who allows this? Some even mocked. "I've seen Dr. Carter's photo. Her hair does look unusual. Calling it a safari isn't wrong." Every word was a knife twisting in Maya's chest. She sat in the hotel suite in London, hands trembling as she scrolled her phone. On the screen, images of her were cut and spliced, turning her into the symbol of the elite oversensitive. She was no longer the victim of prejudice, but the emblem of privilege. If Maya was made into the face of fragility, then Ethan became the prime target. The media portrayed him as a tyrant, a billionaire crushing the voice of a working-class man. A passenger's video of Ethan saying, "You are my employee, and you are fired immediately," spread like wildfire. Stripped of context, the clip became proof of CEO arrogance. On Twitter, one viral comment with tens of thousands of likes read, "If he can fire a captain with a single sentence, who among us is safe? This isn't justice, it's feudalism." Ethan sat in the hotel room, eyes bloodshot, as he stared at his laptop screen. Every article, every comment felt like stones hurled at the fortress of reputation he had spent a lifetime building. "He's twisting the truth," Ethan growled, his knuckles white as his fists clenched. "A racist insult turned into a joke, and now we're the villains." Maya placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice trembling. "This is the familiar playbook, Ethan. He isn't the bigot anymore. He's the victim of cancel culture. And I'm no longer the insulted woman. I'm just the reason you're under attack." The media storm dragged Aegis stock down 3% in just 3 days. Not much for $100 billion dollar conglomerate, but enough for Gregory Pierce, chairman of the board, to call Ethan in fury. His voice was rough with anger. "Ethan, you've turned a cockroach into a dragon. What should have been a minor incident is now a public war. The board doesn't care about feelings, they care about stability, and you are pushing everything out of control." Ethan gripped the phone, jaw clenched. He knew Gregory was right, at least from a business standpoint. But how could he explain that this wasn't just a minor incident? That Hale's words cut into wounds of history, that the silence of the entire cabin was exactly why his wife had nearly been swallowed whole. Ethan's reply was hoarse. "If I had to do it again, I would still fire him on the spot." Silence. Then Gregory's voice returned, slow and deliberate, like a warning. "We'll see how long you can keep saying that. The board will not stand still if you drag us down with you." As the media burned hotter, a white envelope arrived at Aegis headquarters. Inside was an official letter. Richard Hale was filing a lawsuit. Charges: wrongful termination, defamation, and emotional distress. The damages sought: $50 million. At the Aegis boardroom table, Victor Lamb laid out the case before Ethan and the leadership team. "The racial discrimination angle is weak because we have witnesses, but the procedural case is strong. Ethan, you made him the center of attention yourself. And now, they aren't suing the company, they are suing you." The room fell silent. Ethan looked down at his hands, remembering the moment he had clasped Maya's in the cabin. That decision, in that instant, had been about love and dignity. Now it had become a ticking time bomb that could destroy his career. Maya sat quietly, watching. She felt herself turning into an excuse. At first she had been the victim, wild. Now she was just a piece of the story of a CEO who lost control. She was no longer the center, just a shadow. Richard Hale's $50 million lawsuit dropped like an axe, splitting the air inside the glass tower of Aegis Holdings. A lawsuit could be settled with money, but behind that figure was a blade aimed directly at Ethan Carter. He was no longer just a CEO. He was now a defendant, personally under attack. And the most dangerous part was that Hale didn't only want money. He wanted to destroy Ethan's reputation, to turn him into the symbol of abused power. In the boardroom on the 48th floor, the lights reflected across polished wood. Victor Lamb, chief legal counsel, pointed at the screen where a chart glowed. "Hale's strategy is clear. He doesn't have to prove his innocence. He only has to prove that Ethan is hot-tempered, tyrannical, and reckless with procedure. The court won't be judging Hale. It will be judging you." Helena Ortiz, head of human resources, folded her hands, her voice gravelly. "We warned you. You cut corners, ignored protocol. Now he has both the union and public opinion behind him. Ethan stayed silent, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He knew they were right, but in his memory, Hale still stood there, spitting out words that cut at Maya, while the entire cabin stayed silent. In that moment, he hadn't been a CEO, he had been a husband. And husbands do not stand idle. The summons arrived. Discovery, the brutal legal phase, began. Hale's lawyers tore through every email, text, and internal report. They wanted proof Ethan had overstepped his power, abused his authority. Worse, they demanded that Maya Carter testify under oath. Absolutely not! Ethan slammed his palm on the table, his eyes blazing. She's the victim. No one drags Maya into this filth. Victor replied evenly. If we refuse, the media will say she's too afraid to face the truth. They'll say Dr. Carter is only protected by her husband. The only way through is for her to speak herself. The room fell into silence. Maya had been standing at the door, listening. She stepped in, her eyes steady, her voice firm. I'll do it. I'll tell the truth myself. No one takes my voice away from me, ever again. Ethan turned, his face etched with pain. He wanted to shield her, but her look told him clearly. This was a battle Maya needed to fight with her own voice. The law office in Midtown Manhattan was sterile, beige walls, a cold wooden table, a recorder blinking in the center like a mechanical eye. Across from Maya sat Damon Pike, Hale's seasoned attorney, a man known on television as the Truth Bender. He opened with a falsely sweet tone. Dr. Carter, you are a renowned pediatric cardiologist. Please tell us exactly what Captain Hale said. He said, "Didn't think we had a safari tour in first class," Maya answered flatly, her voice calm, though her hands tightened beneath the table. Pike smiled. So you agree that the word safari simply refers to a wildlife tour? Could it be, just possibly, that the captain was referring to your unique hairstyle? Victor cut in sharply. Objection, leading and prejudicial. The judge noted the objection, but allowed the questioning. Maya drew a breath. She locked her gaze on Pike. My hair is part of my cultural identity. When he used that word with scorn, it wasn't a compliment. It was a way to push me out, to brand me as an outsider in first class. Pike tilted his head like a serpent testing its prey. Do you have any evidence of scornful tone, or is this only your personal feeling? Each word cut like a knife, but Maya's eyes never wavered. I am a doctor. I read every heartbeat, every flicker of a patient's face. I know the difference between a clumsy joke and a deliberate stab. And this stab, I felt it in my blood. The room went silent. Even the stenographer looked up for a moment. Pike didn't relent. He pivoted to Ethan. Your husband, Ethan Carter, is CEO of Aegis Holdings. He is known for his temper. Would you admit he fired Hale, not because of procedure, but because of a burst of anger to protect you? Victor growled, Objection. But Maya spoke before she could be stopped. Yes, he protected me. But protection is not rage. Protection is setting boundaries. Captain Hale crossed every boundary. Pike's eyebrows arched. So you admit this was a personal decision, not a corporate one? Maya hesitated for a beat. Just one. But Pike's smile showed he knew he had planted a seed of doubt. Back at their apartment, Maya sat by the window, staring at the city lights. Ethan came in and wrapped his arms around her. "I'm sorry. You should never have had to endure that." His voice was hoarse. "No, Ethan. I needed to. I needed to take my voice back. But I'm afraid," her eyes shimmered, "I'm afraid they won't listen, that all they want is to twist me into evidence against you." Ethan held her tighter, whispering, "Let them try. As long as we stand together, they won't break us." But he knew the truth. Outside, the legal machine did not care about love or truth. It only devoured, ground everything down, and called it procedure. Less than a week after Maya's deposition, the board of directors of Aegis Holdings convened a closed-door meeting at the New York headquarters. The grand conference room on the 50th floor, its glass walls opening onto the skyline, had become an arena. On the massive LED screen, stock charts flickered. Aegis had lost 7% of its value in 2 weeks. That number did not threaten the company's survival, but it was enough to boil the blood of long-time shareholders. Gregory Pierce, chairman of the board, his silver hair perfectly combed, his eyes as cold as forged steel, sat at the head of the table. His fingers tapped softly against the polished wood, the sound like the ticking of a clock counting down. "Ethan," his voice was deep and icy, "we cannot continue like this. The company is bleeding, and it all began with one impulsive decision from you." Ethan sat upright, hands clasped tight. Before him were 12 faces, people who had once hailed him as a restructuring genius, now staring with suspicion. One member, Margaret Sloane, spoke in a sharp, high-pitched tone. "We poured millions into building an image of a company that is friendly, diverse, civilized, and now it's all shattered by one moment of temper. You've turned Aegis into a target in the culture war." Another member cut in. "We're not debating morality. We're debating stability. Shareholders want profit, not drama on the front page." Ethan clenched his fists, his voice strained but resolute. "And what is stability? Letting our captain call my wife, a woman of color, a safari tour? Letting passengers see that this company tolerates discrimination? If that's the stability you want, it's nothing but cowardice dressed up in a nice frame." The room grew heavier. Gregory leaned back, his eyes drilling into Ethan. "We want a CEO, not a vengeful husband. You forgot your role. You should have acted as a chairman, but you reacted like a reckless lover." After murmurs of discomfort circled the table, Gregory spoke clearly, each word deliberate. "The board is considering a vote of no confidence. If you continue to turn this into a personal crusade, we will be forced to find your replacement." The words hit like a hammer against stone. Ethan had built Aegis from the ruins, transformed it into a financial empire worth tens of billions. And yet now, in a single meeting, his throne shook. His lips curled into a bitter smile, his voice gravelly. "You want me to surrender? To cut a check for a racist and call it a business solution? Call me a failed CEO if you want. But I will never call cowardice justice." Margaret slammed her pen against the table. "This isn't about justice, Ethan. This is about survival." That night, Ethan sat in his penthouse, staring down at streets glowing with yellow light. His inbox overflowed. Warnings from market reports, threatening messages from minor shareholders. Maya walked in and laid a hand on his shoulder. She saw his eyes, red and hollow, dark circles carved like charcoal. "They've cornered you," she whispered. "They don't care about truth. They just want to save the numbers." Ethan turned, gripping her hand. "I would rather lose everything than sign a check for Hale. Doing that would mean admitting he was right." Maya hesitated. Pride surged in her for the man who stood against an entire system. But she also saw the darkness circling him, the board, the media, the crowd, all like wolves, waiting for Ethan to falter so they could pounce. "I believe in you," she said softly. "But Ethan, you must think of the thousands of employees, the thousands of families who live because of Aegis. If you lose your throne, who will protect them?" The question fell like a stone. Ethan said nothing. In the mirror, he no longer saw an untouchable CEO, but a man pushed to the edge of a cliff. The next morning, Victor Lamb brought a draft settlement. "If you sign, we pay Hale. In exchange, he stays silent forever. Shareholders calm down. The board keeps you in place." Ethan held the paper. On it were cold lines, a lifetime NDA, a compensation figure, terms of absolute silence. He clenched it, feeling like he was holding burning coal. Signing meant betraying justice. Refusing meant casting himself off the throne. Maya stood behind him, silent. She did not push. She knew this was a decision only Ethan could make. Outside, the city lights still blazed, but to Ethan, every one of them seemed dim. He heard the clock ticking, reminding him the time of a king was running out. In the days following the board meeting, the atmosphere at Aegis Holdings was as thick as smoke in a closed room. Every call, every email revolved around a single question: settle or fight. Ethan Carter walked into the internal conference room. On the table, piles of legal documents were stacked high. Victor Lamb, chief legal counsel, opened a file, his voice hoarse but steady. "The other side knows we're cornered. Hale and his lawyer, Damon Pike, won't accept a loan number. They smell blood." Ethan growled. Giving him even $1 would be betrayal. Helena Ortiz, head of HR, cut in, her sharp eyes locking on Ethan. "The problem is, if you don't settle, the board will betray you first. Do you want to lose the throne, or swallow this bitter pill and live to fight another day?" Ethan leaned back, his eyes burning with fire. He had signed billion-dollar deals in his life, but never had his signature weighed so heavily. While Aegis huddled behind closed doors, Damon Pike paraded Richard Hale on a media tour. Every TV show, every podcast, Hale sat upright, eyes heavy with sorrow, voice raspy, like a father robbed of his livelihood. "I don't need riches. I just want to fly, to serve." But one clumsy joke destroyed everything, Hale said, his trembling hand pressed to his chest. Audiences listened. Some wept. On social media, the hashtag #StandWithHale shot to the top of the trends. Maya watched one clip on her phone, her hand clenched white. In every frame, Hale was cast as a martyr. while she, the true victim, was erased from the story. "Do you see?" Maya's voice broke as she turned to Ethan. "I'm gone. Now it's just Hale and you. I'm no longer the woman humiliated. I'm the excuse they use to call you a tyrant." Ethan laid a hand on his wife's shoulder, his eyes heavy. "I swear I won't let him win. But Maya, this battlefield was never fair. It never will be." The day of settlement arrived. A conference suite in a gleaming midtown Manhattan tower. One half of the long table was filled with the Aegis team, the other with Hale's lawyers. Damon Pike seated at the center, his face wearing a polite, mocking smile. Ethan entered, still carrying the aura of a CEO, though his eyes betrayed fatigue. Maya sat behind him, not officially part of the negotiation, but her presence kept both sides taut. Pike began, his tone deliberate, as if rehearsed. "My client has lost his honor, his career, his lifetime income. $2 million is far too little. We demand $10 million. Victor Lamb shot up. "Absurd. We have witnesses. We have evidence. This isn't a legal case of racial discrimination. He's exploiting procedure." Pike shrugged, his eyes narrowing. "Then let's see what a jury thinks. Carter filmed himself firing a man like a king on a throne. That video is viral. Do you really think a jury will side with the cold billionaire or the broken old pilot?" Every word from Pike cut like a blade. Ethan's anger rose, but he forced it down. This wasn't a courtroom. It was a bargaining floor. Maya could not remain silent. She rose, her voice sharp as steel. "He is no victim. He looked at me, at my hair, and called me a safari tour. He turned the cabin into a public courtroom, leaving me to sit in the silence of accomplices. That was no joke. That was humiliation." The room went still. Pike faltered for a beat, then regained his smirk. "Dr. Carter, I respect you, but feelings are not evidence. Courts deal with procedure, and procedure is what your husband violated." Ethan's fists tightened, but this time Maya placed her hand on his arm, urging restraint. Her eyes told him, "Don't let him control your anger." The negotiation dragged for hours. Numbers tossed across the table, each rejection like chess pieces clashing on a board of survival. From 10 million, Pike lowered to 5. From 2, Aegis nudged to 2.5. Finally, they met at $2.5 million, tied to a strict NDA, the golden muzzle that would silence Hale forever. Pike smiled with triumph as he signed. Hale himself was absent. He left it to his lawyer, preserving his image as the silent victim for the outside world. When the door closed, Ethan sat in silence. On paper, he had won, the number far below Pike's demand. But inside, it tasted like bitter defeat. He got the money. You lost your dignity. I lost my principles. So who really won? Ethan murmured, hollow. Maya squeezed his hand, her voice gentle but firm. Winning and losing don't belong here. Justice isn't measured on balance sheets. What matters is that we still stand together. The board accepted the settlement. Stocks recovered. Ethan kept his title, but under conditions. All high-level disciplinary actions must pass through committee, and he was required to undergo leadership training. He kept the throne, but as a king in chains. In the mirror of his office, Ethan saw not the invincible CEO, but a man scarred beyond repair. Outside, the media proclaimed, "Dispute resolved amicably." But Ethan and Maya knew the storm had only quieted, not ended. Karma doesn't finish with a signature. It changes form, waits, and prepares to strike again. The day the settlement was announced, the sky over New York was heavy with grey, clouds hanging like a suffocating curtain over the city. Aegis Holdings' press release contained only a few sterile lines. The matter between Captain Richard Hale and Aegis Holdings has been resolved in a spirit of cooperation. Both parties agree it was an unfortunate incident arising from differences in perception. Mr. Hale will retire and devote time to his family. Aegis remains committed to values of respect and diversity. Not a single word of apology. Not a single mention of discrimination. Just a lifeless statement, the product of endless lawyers' polishing. Meanwhile, the Sentinel opened with blazing headlines. The common man triumphs over the giant. Richard Hale secures multi-million-dollar payout after confrontation with autocratic CEO. On television, anchors smirked with satisfaction. Let's call this a victory of the worker over arrogance. 35 years of service ending with $2.5 million. A message to every CEO. Power has limits. Maya's image appeared only in passing, reduced to a caption, "The CEO's wife." No one spoke of the original humiliation. The story had been rewritten into one of a billionaire cornered and a martyr pilot. At the 50th floor office, Ethan Carter sat alone after a board meeting. The decision to keep him had passed, but with humiliating conditions. Every high-level disciplinary decision now required committee approval. Ethan had to undergo human-centered leadership training. PR and HR were granted authority to filter his words. He kept his throne, but stripped of freedom. A king chained by signatures. In the mirror, Ethan saw a stranger staring back. The flawless suit, the neatly knotted tie, but eyes fractured with cracks. He whispered, "Did I win, or did I lose?" In their penthouse, Maya sat by the window, gazing down at the restless city. She scrolled through the comments. An overly sensitive woman ruined another man's career. If she had stayed silent, the pilot would still have his job. Of course, the CEO's wife always gets what she wants. Each word was an arrow. She clutched her head, remembering the cabin, Hale's eyes, the silence of the passengers. The humiliation had been real, but the world had twisted it into a collective joke. Ethan walked in, finding his wife in silence. He came closer, his voice low. "I'm sorry. This outcome, it doesn't honor you." Maya lifted her head, her tone bitter. "No, Ethan. This outcome doesn't honor anyone." A week later, as the media began to move on, Maya stumbled across a buried news brief. Legal Defense Fund for Victims of Discrimination receives anonymous $2.5 million donation. She opened the article. The foundation's director declared, "This contribution will fund dozens of lawsuits against discrimination. This is real change for the vulnerable." Maya froze. 2.5 million. The number struck like a shiver. She rushed into the study. Ethan stood by the glass wall, his back to her. "It was you, wasn't it?" she whispered. He did not turn, but his shoulders eased. His answer was quiet, steady. "Money can't erase humiliation, but it can become a weapon for others. I won't let that dirty payout consume us. I want it to be a beginning." Maya stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him from behind. Hot tears streamed down her cheeks, for the first time not from anguish, but from release. In that moment, she understood. Justice does not always strike like lightning, swift and punishing. Sometimes it flows quietly, turning blood money into seeds of change. Richard Hale may believe he won, walking away with a fortune and the image of a hero in the eyes of the crowd. But in truth, his voice had been caged by a golden muzzle, an eternal NDA. His career gone, his words buried. He had money, but no future. Ethan had kept the company, but learned the bitter truth that his power was not limitless. He was still a king, but a king forced to bow to process. And Maya, once a victim erased from the story, now smiled, knowing the very money from the man who demeaned her was being used to protect other women, other workers, those who never had a voice. After the anonymous donation of $2.5 million to the Legal Defense Fund, the media slowly cooled. Richard Hale's name appeared less and less in the press. Aegis Holdings stabilized its stock. The board of directors stopped threatening Ethan, too busy returning to balance sheets and new deals. From the outside, everything looked settled. But inside, Maya Carter knew that this peace was nothing more than a thin layer of ice covering a deep abyss. Late at night, Maya stood in the bathroom, staring into the mirror. The woman looking back had tired eyes and heavy shoulders. She remembered the thousands of comments calling her the oversensitive CEO's wife, the reason a pilot lost his career. She whispered, "I am a doctor. I save children's lives. I have spent my entire life proving my worth through my work. And yet now, everyone only sees me as a shadow behind my husband." Maya realized that the pain did not only come from Hale's insult, but also from the silence that followed. The world had erased her from the story, turning her into an excuse, a footnote. One morning, Maya walked into Ethan's office. He was buried in financial reports. She placed a folder on the desk. "What is this?" Ethan asked, looking up. "A speech," Maya replied firmly. "I accepted an invitation to speak at an international conference on medicine and equality in professional environments. I will tell my story, not as a CEO's wife, but as a woman who was publicly humiliated. And I will speak about how silence becomes complicity." Ethan frowned, concerned. "Maya, you know Hale is bound by an NDA. But the company will want you silent too. They are afraid any word from you will reignite the fire." Maya looked directly at her husband, her eyes glowing for the first time in months. "I am not afraid anymore. I have held countless fragile hearts in my hands, every incision a line between life and death. If I can keep my hands steady, holding a scalpel, why would I tremble holding my own voice?" Ethan froze. In his wife's eyes, he no longer saw a wounded woman, but a warrior ready to step out of the shadows. The auditorium was packed. Over 500 doctors, researchers, and medical students gathered to hear Dr. Maya Carter. When she walked to the podium, Applause thundered, yet she could feel the weight of curious eyes. Is this the woman from the Horizon Air scandal? She drew a deep breath. Her voice rang out, slow at first. I am not here to talk about lawsuits or settlements. I am here to talk about a moment. The moment I sat in first class and heard the man flying the plane call my hair a safari tour. The hall fell silent. Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. The most painful part was not those words. It was the silence of the cabin. Men in sharp suits, people holding champagne glasses, all lowered their eyes to the safety card instead of standing up. That silence killed my voice more than the insult itself. She paused, eyes locking on the front row. Today, I refuse to be silent. And I urge each of you, when you see injustice, do not look away. Do not become the silent spectators in first class. Because every time we stay silent, another Richard Hale will take off. Applause exploded. Some stood, eyes brimming with tears. Maya's speech was recorded and shared online. Within days, it spread across the globe. The hashtag #BreakTheSilence appeared, encouraging people to share moments when they had been belittled, when they had witnessed injustice and stayed quiet. The media began to change its tone. It was no longer just the story of a CEO firing a pilot, but the story of Maya Carter, a woman who dared to reclaim the voice that had been stolen. Even some journalists who had once criticized admitted, "We were wrong to ignore the victim's perspective. In truth, she is the center." That night, Ethan watched the video of the speech with Maya. He squeezed her hand gently. I tried to protect you with power, but in the end, it was your voice that saved us both. Maya smiled. Ethan, you built the wall that shielded me, but I had to walk out on my own. No one could speak for me. In that moment, Ethan understood a bitter yet beautiful truth. His power could silence one act of discrimination, but only Maya's voice could transform the story into a message for the world. 1 month after the speech, Maya Carter's name appeared on the cover of a prestigious medical journal. Not because of the Horizon Air scandal, but for being the woman who turned personal humiliation into a global movement. Break the silence. Thousands of stories flooded social media. Nurses recounting how they had been dismissed in hospitals, engineers speaking about gender discrimination, students sharing the mocking laughs of professors. Together, they were rewriting the map of silence. Maya read each story, her eyes blurred with tears. She no longer felt alone. Her voice had opened the door for thousands of other voices to step through. Meanwhile, at Aegis headquarters, Ethan Carter continued his work. He still sat in the CEO's chair, but now every decision passed through a layer of scrutiny. He was no longer a lone sword-bearer, but a king who had to learn to bow before the rules. Each time he signed a personnel file, he remembered the moment he stood before Richard Hale in that cabin. That decision had been the eruption of a husband's heart, but it was also the beginning of the chains he now carried. Ethan did not regret it, but he understood that power has a price, and sometimes that price is the very hands that once believed they could do everything. And Richard Hale, he vanished from the media right after the settlement. The NDA was a golden muzzle locking his mouth. No more talk show appearances, no more hashtags demanding justice for Hale. A few small papers reported that he was living quietly in Florida, in a house by the sea, retreating in bitterness. He had money, but no honor and no career. Neighbors looked at him with a mix of pity and suspicion. Each time he turned on the TV and saw a plane take off, he looked away. The roar of engines that had once been his life's music was now only the echo of his failure. Hale's karma was not prison, nor poverty. It was eternal silence, the most painful punishment for a man who had once lived by his voice and authority in the cockpit. One afternoon, Maya walked through the hospital where she worked. Young doctors smiled as she passed. A few nurses whispered, "Break the silence," under their breath. She realized that the story no longer belonged only to her. A colleague approached quietly and said, "Thank you. Because of you, I found the courage to file a complaint when I was discriminated against in the department. I am not silent anymore." Maya nodded gently, her lips forming a smile. In that moment, she understood that justice is not the thunderstorm in the skies, but the hidden current flowing within each person. At night, in their penthouse, Ethan stood gazing out over the city. Maya walked up behind him and wrapped her arms around him. They stood in silence, listening only to the beating of each other's hearts. Finally, Maya whispered, "You know, I used to think justice was the moment Hale was pulled off that plane. But now I understand. Justice is not an explosion. It is a journey. And sometimes, justice is simply the silence that has finally been broken." Ethan nodded, his eyes soft in a way rarely seen. "I lost absolute freedom, but I never lost you. And that is the only victory I need." The story closed with each carrying their own karma. Hale, imprisoned by his golden muzzle, with money, but without a voice. Ethan, still on the throne, but forced to learn the limits of power, realizing that love sometimes means sacrificing a part of that power. And Maya, once an invisible victim, now stood tall, transforming humiliation into a movement and reclaiming her voice for herself and thousands of others. Karma is not lightning from the sky, but a complex and quiet reckoning. The one who insulted lost his voice. The one with power lost absolute freedom, and the one who was once dismissed gained the strongest voice of all. This story shows us a truth. Justice in real life does not always come from verdicts handed down in a courtroom, but sometimes from the courage to stand up in the very moment it is needed. An insult can diminish dignity, but it can also open the door to reveal true power and to assert boundaries that must never be crossed. If you believe that respect and fairness are values that cannot be negotiated, hit like to help spread this message, and subscribe so you do not miss the stories to come, where every moment can become a turning point. And do not forget to leave a comment with the phrase, "Stand tall," to show that you too choose to stand firm in the face of injustice.